Welcome to the AIEA Series of interviews interviewing the second generation of leaders in the field of international education who've helped bring the field to the expansive prominence that it holds today in American higher education and in the world's higher education. I say American first only because I am American, and this series is sponsored by the AIEA organization, which is an American organization. But AIEA is an international organization as well. We're meeting in Montreal, Canada, and I'm very privileged to introduce today one of Canada's leaders in international education, who has helped to develop Canadian as well as global internationalization. That is Sylvain St-Amand, whose name I'm sure I'm not saying right,
although I'm
trying, who is with the University of Quebec in Montreal, and who was previously for many, many years at McGill. And his career in all these years has been heavily invested in the idea of internationalization and international education. There are certainly differences between American and Canadian developments, as well as similarities, and both of us function in some ways similarly, in some ways differently in the world, on the world scene of international education. So this will be an interesting conversation about the similarities, the differences, and the trajectory of growth. And given that, what I would like to do is begin by asking you, why did you get into this field at a time when the field didn't exist as a profession, and how did that happen?
Oh, it happened a long time ago, obviously. 30 years ago, this year, I went to China for the first time. Mm-hmm. This is how it all started. Mm-hmm. I was at a point in my career where I was, a little bit before in the 80s, after my bachelor, wondering what should I do, what kind of field should I go in. I'm a historian, so I decided to go and study China. Mm-hmm. And I remember at the time my mother said, she cried actually. What's wrong with you?
Of course.
And then I went to China to do some research for my master's. 1986 was a very interesting year in China. Mm-hmm. Opening more and more, and it was just before Tiananmen. So there was a movement among universities of opening up and connecting with the rest of the world. Came back to Canada, tried to pay my loans, and Tiananmen happened. And McGill and the government at the time had a big debate whether they should stop any boycotting China, or with the Canadian International Development Agency, continue some work. And the decision at the time, which I thought was very good, was to continue the dialogue with universities, because some pressure at the government level could be useful, but continuing with the universities was also important. Right. And that's how I got into McGill, because we were coordinating a huge project that doesn't happen.
Who is we? What were you doing?
Okay, I was hired by McGill University, the Faculty of Management. Mm-hmm. I just got a grant of $28 million mm-hmm. to develop business schools.
Oh, of course. Oh, yes.
So that's how I got involved, and that's how I started to work with 25 universities in China.
Wow.
So it was very interesting because we were working with the old generations who were trained before the war, mostly in the United States and the UK, and a very new generation who went through the Cultural Revolution. Right. And didn't study at the university, but took care of the pigs or worked with the the workers and so on and so forth. And that's how we started to work, developing a new understanding of management. And management is not only making profit and this and that. It's, for me, mostly governance, transparency, mm-hmm. decision making, managing people. And we did that for 5 years. The government stopped funding, as usual. But I continued to go into China, and now I see those 25 schools doing extremely well.
Wow.
Most of my young colleagues, who at the time were taking, they were studying in Canada, right. are now deans, are now vice principals, right. have published, have supervised so many students. So anyway, that was the start of my career. Very quickly, of course, we saw that the government would not support the continuation of China, because China was developing and they would. So I thought, okay, it's time to diversify. At the time, my office was the Center for International Management Studies. I thought I had developed some understanding of developing management studies in countries, regions, economies that were coming from another background, if you want. So we started a project in Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Armenia, Pakistan, continuing in China, and suddenly I was discussing with colleagues about internationalization of studies.
Mm-hmm.
And
so it evolved out of
It evolved
practice.
slowly because at
Yeah.
the time we had some discussions at conferences on how to structure, what kind of focus should we look at, but it was not articulated as it is today.
Right.
You know, internationalization didn't mean what it means today.
Right.
So that's how it evolved.
And what then happened in terms of your own career and the things you were doing, and in Canada, to develop to where we are now? What did you do at McGill? What did it mean to internationalize? What did you think the challenges were and how you should overcome them?
Mm-hmm. It's interesting to reflect on that. I think my career is really, really parallel to the evolution of
Mm-hmm.
universities and their international
Mm-hmm.
outlook. I come from cooperation, North-South development, you know,
Right.
Canadian International Development Agency, the World Bank,
Right.
United Nations, the idea of technical assistance,
Right.
of technology transfer. So I think that for like many of my generations and colleagues, we that's how we started,
Mm-hmm.
to develop a proposal, a project, identifying a needs, working with some universities, just like I did with management schools. It evolved because the funding evolved. And when I switched from McGill to UQAM, University of Quebec in Montreal, then I realized that the challenges were different. Suddenly, universities were not so excited and keen on technology transfer for many reasons. One reason, the main reason, is that you take some resources away from academic field because suddenly they start working on a project
Right.
elsewhere. There's not much research most of the time. So
Right.
it's really training, and training in very specific fields. So it's the structural return, the return on what do we learn
Investment,
abroad,
right.
is, it's sad to say, but it's very based on some individuals who develop an expertise.
Right.
And most of them, maybe I'm making a big judgment, but
No, but
most of them become consultants,
Mm-hmm.
more than bringing back this knowledge into the field.
Right.
So as we all look at that and look, why are we doing this? To make money? But that's not the purpose. What do we transfer? Do we really transfer technology? Do we work as colleagues or do we work as consultants?
Yeah.
So this whole thing suddenly put a kind of a stop on the focus on cooperation.
So was that because at Quebec, as opposed to McGill, there was a different mindset? Or
I think it's
did you
Canada.
think it
I would say
everywhere?
Canada, because the funding went down.
Because of the governmental funding. So then
Exactly.
the question became, is there a real return on investment that we can see domestically?
Right.
Is that, am I understanding?
Okay, let me try to look at it from a different angle.
Okay,
We developed offices
Right.
with staff that were really geared into that kind of projects.
right, to development projects.
Development
overseas.
projects, not
Yeah.
really academic, but developing,
Right.
identifying needs, trying to find ways to really help.
To make the university become the agent of change.
Exactly. Now the funding goes down. Canadian International Development Agency had very interesting project that we were developing. Suddenly you have staff, you need to make some money to pay the staff to continue your work, right? So suddenly you're starting to work to reproduce yourself.
Right,
Very dangerous.
right.
And suddenly you try to find other funding agencies to compensate. And suddenly, you start to make compromises on what you do.
Right.
It's less and less academic. It's more and more economic or governance-oriented. Anyway, so you're starting to stretch your resources to continue in that direction. And suddenly you have to think, well, are we doing the right thing?
Right.
As it was happening, a new field was opening, student mobility. I switched to UQAM in 2006. It was a time when the Quebec government decided to put a lot of money in student exchange. Mm-hmm. And to this day, we're very lucky in Quebec. Every student who wants to go abroad has a scholarship.
Wow.
And until very recently, it was about $1,000 a month to go abroad.
Gosh.
So it was. So suddenly we have a lot of money available for students, but no network.
Right.
No capacity, because, as you know, it's very complicated to develop a network. So my staff suddenly is switched to a different purpose.
Yeah. And
suddenly student mobility becomes the focus.
Right.
And we started to go to conferences, NAFSA, EAIE, API, to find partners with whom we could really develop academic projects for our students.
Right.
And that has been, I would say, for the last 7 years, mm-hmm. perhaps. I'm putting some numbers, but it's a continuum to develop that network. So we went from, and every partnership involves about 2 or 3 students. We have about 500 students going abroad every year.
Right.
It takes a lot of partners.
It takes
a lot of effort. It's a lot of coordination, a lot of
You're running
exchanges.
Your own study abroad program in all those locations.
Exactly. And for 500 students who go abroad, of course we have 500 or 600 coming
in. Right.
So the whole office has been for many years geared into that direction.
Right.
And I'll get back to AIEA and NAFSA and so on. But
yeah,
So that you see my career evolves, and suddenly I'm more into the studies.
Right. So you go into it with one set of expectations, but the world takes you elsewhere.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Of course, the experience of running budgets and this and that is useful, but you have to retool yourself.
Right.
For the last 3 years, again, I'm just putting dates, but let's say for the last 3 years, we have shifted again to move away a little bit. Now that we have this network, now that it's going, it's a mechanic that works quite well.
Right.
And it comes at peaks 3 times a year.
Right.
And it works. Suddenly we thought, and it's part of the reflection that we all have in those conferences and among ourselves, the shift is to internationalize research.
Yes.
Because all of us realize that students going abroad is great for the students. But again, the return on the institution is not that great.
Yeah.
You have all those partners. We meet maybe twice a year.
Yeah.
We talk of the small things about this faculty, this program, this summer school. But the return again to the faculty, to our core mandate, our core business, it's not so great.
Right.
So now we're trying to internationalize research. And I'm into it now, and there's a lot of reflection. Again, let me, if I can continue about my own.
That's what I'm asking.
So when we have a new rector 3 years ago, and for him it was, he told me 2 things. One, international is not only the international office. So suddenly I thought, whoa, that's my turf.
Yeah.
You're saying that other people will play in my sandbox?
In your playground, yeah.
And the second thing is that you have to develop the internationalized research. And after the shock, because you interpret that in so many ways, he's right. International belongs to the community.
Yeah. And
the more you try to centralize it, the less other people are involved. Right? Mm-hmm. So we changed completely the way we are trying to work. At the beginning, what we tried to do is to strengthen our capacity to help faculty members develop their international research.
Mm-hmm.
Through our network, trying to find projects,
Peers,
funding,
right.
peers, teams, where it's something that my university has been developing the environmental studies from the very beginning. We were one of the first universities deciding that environmental studies was a field in itself. At the time, people were saying, no, it's biology, it's chemistry, it's sociology, it's science, politicals, but it's not a field.
Right.
Of course, now it's a field.
Right.
So that for our partners in China, in Europe, in Brazil, South America, so we tried to develop that. As we were reinforcing and retooling my staff to do that, suddenly you look at the Office of Research. Are we competing? Are we stepping on each other's toes?
Yeah.
Are we duplicating something that exists? And maybe we should move research into international, or move international into research. And again, this is not over, right? This is a reflection. But
right.
At this point, I think that I'm trying to convince the community to do that, but I think, and it's a scoop, so I don't know when this will be published, but anyway, what we're trying to do is to internationalize the services, the Office of Research, Office of Technology Transfer, strengthening them,
right,
and reallocating our resources and our staff into these offices.
Wow. So you're basically dismantling some of your own infrastructure in order to expand.
Yeah, because as we are doing, and there's another big movement in my university, is that we are giving more and more autonomy to the faculties.
Yeah.
Because we are a young university. We were created in 69.
This is different from the US,
69.
I will tell you that. Yeah.
And it was very centralized. We were trying to invent a new model, but as it evolved, we became more and more a university like the other ones, right? Because we want credibility, we want to be recognized, and not, it's normal, right? It's like an adult,
right?
Trying to, I'll cut my hair, I'll put a tie, because I want to be with the other guys. I don't want to be always looked at as marginal one.
Yeah.
So as we are giving autonomy to the faculties, they want to also internationalize in their way, the faculty of management, science, anyway. So how can we do that? We don't have resources to put resources in every faculty. So the only way is to strengthen the offices that are already into the faculty. So that's, we haven't solved all the problems, but it's and moving my role and reduce staff to a more strategic level.
Right. Right.
Less into the operation and more as a consultant or resource-based,
right,
to help. So instead of strengthening and centralizing, trying to the opposite, really put the resources. So I think in the short term, and that's a reflection, I think in the short term it will be perceived, it might be actually somehow a regression. A little bit, because we'll have less resources in the
less centralized resources, right? And
our partners will have to adapt, and we'll have to adapt. But I think in the very short term, it's the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to see with my colleagues if we're the only ones, and it's in flux at this moment.
In the whole field in Canada.
In the whole field, yeah. Most universities. All universities are saying internationalization is so important.
Right, and that's globally. Internationals are saying this.
But then we are in Quebec. We are going through. It's the third year of budget cuts. We're a state university, so when the government cut, we're hit.
Right, and that you have in common with American institutions.
I'm sure. And then so you have to make decisions. So at one point you say we have priorities, this, and that, and then you have budget cuts, and then reality. Ask you what is really the priority. So as we are doing this, we're trying to be more agile, more economic, and yet continue pushing the internationalization.
Right.
I mean, this is not a luxury that internationalization, as you know, you cannot stop. If you stop, it's like a garden. If you stop 1 year to take care of your garden, oh my God, you'll have a few years to get back to the point where you were.
Right.
So this is me,
So,
and I think it's really the reflection of an evolution of Canadian universities, international.
So in America and in other countries that with whom I have worked, the idea of internationalizing is always talked about with a broad definition that includes student mobility, but includes research, includes curriculum development, et cetera. And I think that the tendency has been towards centralization in order to try to deal with that. But not centralization with total control. Centralization in some ways with the model that you're talking about. And if I'm understanding you correctly, what you're saying is that in Canadian universities, that you began with sort of specific focuses, you moved to student mobility, and now through research you're beginning to move to this broader concept of internationalization, and budget is forcing you to move with new models.
Exactly.
So that seems to be working, though. I mean, it seems to be a working model, though, to be able to reach out to the Office of Technology Transfer or the Office of Institutional Research and make use of existing resources. Do you feel like, in general, that's a positive step for the field here?
I think so. Because, so often in my discussions with other offices, the International Students Office, they say, or your students, or the Office of Research will say, or your projects,
right.
Your partners,
right.
Your visitors, your delegations. It's not.
It's to the university.
It's unhealthy,
Yeah.
So
yeah.
by doing this, what I am hoping to do is so that they appropriate them, they take it for themselves, they integrate
right.
the international activities into their portfolio.
Right.
Instead of looking at me and my staff saying, oh, you.
So it really is internationalization in the best sense of the word, of
I think so.
your domestic constituencies.
I think so. And again, you said it, it's a budget crisis that forced me to move on.
Right.
Because every manager is the same. You try to expand, right?
Yeah.
You want more resources, more staff, more mandate, more responsibilities. That's us, right?
Yeah.
Suddenly you have to rethink and be a little bit humble and say, this is not the right direction.
Yeah.
At what point should I take resources from other units to strengthen internationalization and isolate ourselves?
Right. Well, do you feel that in this process, in the Canadian university system, that despite all of this, that commitment to internationalization really is part of Canadian higher education on a mission level? Is it important still?
I would say so, because I was saying that we have had 3 years of severe budget cuts in education, in healthcare system, and so on and so forth. They haven't touched the mobility budget.
Oh, that's very interesting.
And it's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And they haven't touched that. So I thought, okay, so they really, when they say priority, they mean it.
Right.
Research money in Canada, we have had 10 years of a conservative government who was not sure about science. So it's been 10 years of difficult times. Yeah, it's tough. So research money was reduced, yes. But the emphasis on international research has remained.
Wow, that's
Nevertheless.
So in a way,
in a sense, even for the
yeah.
conservative people, elected or in the government, they're saying, well, we don't have money.
Right.
Get it somewhere else.
Right.
So there was also an encouragement to go on the international field and get some oxygen.
Right.
From Europe or from Brazil for many years who had money, or China, or try to put some projects.
Right. Is Canada as a member of the Commonwealth nations impact any of the work that you do, or is that really irrelevant?
It is and it is not that much. My university, we teach in French.
Right.
So
yeah.
Canada is, as you know, is
yeah.
mostly English. We are 6 million people out of 37, so it's small. Our network is really into the francophonie. France, Belgium, Switzerland, French Africa, and that's about it.
Right.
So this network is working very well. If you want to attract students, well, if they don't speak French, either we help them, or at the PhD level, it's not so much a difficulty. So all the, let's say, Commonwealth scholarships, funding is very difficult for us.
Right.
For example, we have too few partnerships with India and South Asia in general, because French is not so well spoken. China, on the other hand, Brazil has a Francophile tradition.
Right.
French is perceived in Brazil as cultured education. In China, it's an edge.
Yeah.
Students
Really, that's so
they
interesting.
speak most of the students in
Yeah,
university,
that's true.
they have studied English, so they know English, and everybody else is knowing English. Okay, so they go and have a third language.
Right, and French has a tradition there.
Yeah, and there are about, to my last count, 111 universities in China teaching French.
Yeah.
So it's small pockets of,
Right.
of potential students, partners.
Right.
But not so much in India, unfortunately.
Right.
Although there are, but in absolute numbers, it's relatively small.
Right. Now, where do you think all of this is going? In your experience, from your perspective, is especially interesting being the Francophile perspective. What is the future for international education in Canada generally, and in your neck of the woods?
Well, we have a demographic curve that tells us that we need more international students, workers, investors. It's obvious. Because
You need immigration.
We
don't
need
you?
immigration, and we've
Yeah.
been open for many, many years.
Right.
So only for that reason, we'll have more international students. Whether we are very active recruiting them, or they'll come.
Right.
The need to help employers, there's a phone call that I will stop. The need for our society to better understand our new Canadians coming in mean that there's a big future in international studies in general.
Yeah.
Radicalization. We've seen what happened in France last November. This is something, we have our little symptoms of radicalization as well. So we need to open up. We need to educate people. We
Right.
need to find ways to give those immigrants a good chance to...
So you're actually identifying this as a problem, at least in a small way, the radicalization.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
Not yet.
But it potentially could be if you don't do your job, in a
Yes,
sense.
yes. And there's a potential. I mean, it's so frustrating to see comments coming very quickly at some crisis, judgment. Like we have opened our doors to Syrian refugees.
Right.
The comments that you see, even among people that you think would be educated enough to know better, tells me that
Are
we have a lot of work to do.
Anti-migrant, anti-Syrian.
Xenophobic.
Yeah,
I would just say xenophobic in general.
Yeah, okay.
And there's also, there's always been fear in Quebec.
And we see this in the United States right now, too, the same kind of thing, and quite loudly in some cases.
You have to add another layer of fear in Quebec is the language.
Yeah.
There's always this feeling that we need to protect our culture, our
Right.
language. We are immersed in an Anglophone
World.
continent.
Yeah.
So that adds to xenophobic
Response. Yeah.
So no, I think there's a lot of work to be done.
Yeah. It's tough because it puts your field, which has already so many challenges, on the edge again with political challenge,
That's
as
right.
well as economic.
That's right. And as a reflection among ourselves being my colleagues in international offices, what is our role in those crises? When we talk of Syrian refugees,
Yeah.
should we have a voice? Although we're an administrative office.
Right.
Anyway, the question remains.
Yeah.
As an individual,
It's
of
a
course I
huge
can do that.
challenge.
But
It's a
as
huge
an office,
challenge. Right.
to the other units, to the colleagues, to our staff.
It's very interesting. So, if you, what would you like to see happen in the field for you and for your institution? Pardon me.
I'm very excited by what I was saying earlier about internationalizing our university in a real way. Instead of having a very strong international office who spread the good news and some resources, really working in the units.
Yeah.
You know, maybe I shouldn't say that, but I will. International students is for a lot of our staff a burden.
Yeah.
Because it's more work, right? It's more work. You have to explain a little bit more. They come back. In general, at the undergrad level, they have more difficulties succeeding, graduating, than local students.
Right.
So you can imagine all the tensions that comes up, right? Because if we say that will have more, oh my God, how will I cope with this? We're already, having so much difficulty. So we'll need to always remind our colleagues the importance of it.
Right.
And the fact that it's not a choice.
Yeah.
It's happening.
Yeah. Well, as you do this work, and we are attending in Canada, in Montreal, the AIEA conference, and so that means you're active in this kind of association. What have the associations and the organizations been that you've been active in, and how do they help you in your work?
Let's say in two ways. One is the network.
Right. Everybody says that, and it's so important. Everybody I've interviewed
so
says
important
that.
Because you always feel as the director of the international office, you're alone.
Yeah.
Nobody really understands what's going on because they're busy with other responsibilities, right? International office have their own questions, problems. The faculties have so much to deal with. For them, you bring international issues. It's like, oh my God. So it's like when you fight for your budget, when you try to retool staff, you're really by yourself, right?
Right.
And we're so busy. Emails and meetings and this and that, right? Those conferences takes you away from that. And then you see your colleagues. You can talk about issues that we share.
Right.
Even if they're European, American, Brazilian, Chinese. Of course, the environment is a bit different, but the issues are the same.
Are the same, yeah.
And the network also is someone you can call.
Yeah.
Let's say, like, I'm planning a visit to Brazil next month. Of course, I'm talking to my Brazilian colleagues here. And we're helping each other and informing each other of what's going on.
Right.
So it's very useful. So the network is to help you in your reflection. And then there's the conferences.
Yeah.
And this conference is my first time in this conference. I've heard so many good things because I don't want to talk about other conferences, but the bigger they become, the harder it is to find your own interest.
Right.
And you were talking about differences between Canada and the United States. One big difference that I see is that in Canada, universities take care of everything. Study abroad, student exchange, student mobility. When we go to NAFSA, for example, you see so many companies taking care of it for universities. And we are like, oh my God. Because the rest of the world is really
on its own.
On its own. We're really dealing with universities that are doing everything.
Everything, right. That's really an interesting observation. I hadn't thought about that. That's really true.
Even here, I mean, of course, there are few, but you see
some of the
services offered,
and there are services.
And I can see that it must be wonderful to be able to subcontract those work.
But you cannot do it You can't, that's not
Well,
something
it-
available widely.
I don't know if we can or cannot do it. It's just a tradition that everybody's doing it.
Does it themselves. That's very, and it's a Canadian tradition then.
Yeah,
Okay.
and Europe
That's-
as well. Europe
yeah.
as well.
Yeah, that's true.
And Brazil.
Yeah.
And Mexico.
So America is very different in this.
I would say that it's unique.
Yeah.
It's a unique model.
Wow.
We find that in general, American universities favor short-term study abroad
Right,
with their own faculty member,
right,
and if they can, in their own campus abroad.
right. Yeah, that does, yeah, you're right. There is a tendency toward
And
that.
we come from another direction, or from we have, and I'm changing my mind about that, but for many years I've thought that the longer you stay abroad, the better.
Mhm.
I changed my mind a little bit because I still believe that the longer you stay abroad, the better understanding you get from the society where you are, but not everybody can do it.
Yes,
I've seen
that's
that in the
true.
last 10 years,
Right.
we reach a plateau. And whatever we do, we more reach out to students, and the students have money, right? We are lucky that they have a scholarship. So money is not the only issue. Our students work, they have a family, they have responsibilities, they have a car, they have a rent.
Right,
It's very difficult for them to go abroad for 3, 4 months, 1 year.
right.
So there's a core of students who, with or without scholarship, will go abroad.
Right,
And then you have the other students. So, of course, we do internationalization at home. We're trying to, sensitize them to differences, opening to the world, and this and that. Short-term study is also a good way to do it. I'm actually taking a group of students for the first time to China for 3 weeks.
that will be an interesting experience.
Yeah, I'm trying to do something a little bit different. So we're matching our students with a class of Chinese students.
Right, oh, what a great idea,
And
it's a way
it's
to do it.
in the Chinese university. Half of the activities will be with the students and the faculty members of the Chinese university.
That's a great way.
And the other half is the students have to go and interview, visit, gather data, and come back with a report.
Right.
I'm very excited about that.
I think you
see,
should be, that's a great model.
I'm trying to, something else.
Yeah, yeah. And I have come also to agree with you that, in my mind, if you can get a student abroad, whether it's for a week or a year, do it. Because that begins the process of their understanding that the world is a bigger place.
Exactly.
So, yeah, that's very interesting.
Although
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I'm also a bit critical of going abroad to go abroad. There's a big trend in Quebec that students go on humanitarian trip.
What is that?
For 1 week or 2 weeks. They go in a poor village.
Oh, and you
And
have to be
see
so
the poor.
careful about that, yeah.
And they take babies in their hands and they have selfies. That's, for me, is
I think the question in
needs a
our field is,
preparation.
what is our impact on the places we're going?
Exactly. You need to do that very carefully. But
Right.
that has become a trend in the business. So I'm very critical of that.
Yeah.
And in my case with our students, we prepare the students starting in January.
Right.
So when they get to China for 3 weeks, I hope that they will be prepared. Of course, they don't go in orphanages or things like that. But anyway, I think we have to be a little bit critical. It's not because you go abroad that suddenly you get enlightened.
Right.
Just a little...
Right, no, I think you're quite correct. I mean, it's how do you see this? It's not snapping a picture of Notre Dame Cathedral.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or the peasant in the field and say,
Right.
Now
I
enlightened."
understand, right, exactly. No, I think that's very important, especially if Canada is headed in any direction of doing short-term programming. It is something that happened in the United States by evolution, and the models some of them are like yours, I think, quite good. Others are terrible. And they're really ultimate in island travel, of never getting outside of your own culture.
Yeah, it's like being in an aquarium.
Right, exactly.
Or when people go to the ocean and they go on a boat and they look at people swimming and people having a good time. Come on, get into the water.
Right, exactly. And that will be my last question to you, because you're younger than I am. We established that.
I haven't heard that for a while. Usually I tell stories and people say, oh, I wasn't born then.
Exactly. Well, you are younger than I am, and you have at least maybe a decade even in your career. So how do you see that decade? What would you like to do? What would you like to be doing?
I'm starting to try to give back a little bit. I'm involved more and more in associations, in organizations. Mm-hmm. Because it's fun, because also it helps keeping your network active. Mm-hmm. It's not because you have business cards on the desk that it does something. And more, I'm working with younger colleagues.
Yeah.
And I like mentoring,
Yes, I do.
And I like to be challenged because they're smarter. And I always say, if I had to try to get a job today, I'm not sure that I would be hired. Because you see those young guys, young women, they come with a very interesting experience and background. They come with a lot of tools and assets. So it's a privilege, to mentor them, to work with them, to be challenged by them. It's still exciting.
Yeah. Well, then it seems like you will have a very exciting conclusion to your career, and not an immediate conclusion either.
I hope not.
And because you're not quite ready to retire yet, but are still part of the second generation, I thank you for taking the time to talk to us today and to be a part of this AIEA series. So thank you so much for being here.
It was an honor and a pleasure. Thank you so much.